Morning, everyone. Joining me up here are three members of the Independent Lay Committee, John Mahoney, Mike Donahue, Mark Redmond, who are also willing to take any questions that you may have about their process, about the report. Also, as soon as I finish my opening statement, Ellen Kane, our Director of Communications, will moderate, and so you just basically direct your question to one of us, and they'll step up to the podium so that you can capture them on your microphone. Does that work? Okay. The Diocese of Burlington this morning published a report listing the names of diocesan clergy who since 1950 have had a credible and substantiated allegation of sexual abuse of a minor made against them. With one exception, all of these acts occurred over 20 years ago. None of these priests are in ministry. Most of them are deceased. While most of these allegations took place at least a generation ago, the numbers are still staggering. 40 priests who served in the Diocese of Burlington since 1950 abused children. The victims of these priests are still bearing the wounds of what happened to them. Until now, the scope of all this has been our family secret. Family secrets can be toxic. Harmful past experiences, unspoken, unaddressed, and known only by a few, fester like neglected wounds. The innocent victims of the family secrets are often made to feel ashamed about what happened, as no one listens to them, or even sadly at times believes them. While these secrets remain hidden, those who have been hurt are often unable to find the healing they need, especially if those who harmed them are still part of the family, even if in memory. Church is not immune from this. We often talk about the church as a family in which we are brothers and sisters. We are supposed to be a people of love, a place of hope, community of healing, but that has not always been the case. This is especially true with the significant number of cases involving the sexual and physical abuse of children by clergy, not just here in Vermont, but in the entire church. These sins of the past continue to haunt us. These shameful, sinful, criminal acts have been our family secret for generations. While there has been a significant action by the church here in Vermont and in the United States to address the issue of the sexual abuse of minors by clergy and the cover-up of those crimes by those in authority, the whole sordid tale of what happened in the decades leading up to the U.S. Bishop's Charter in 2002 has not been fully aired. That is why I asked for this report to be compiled and published. I want to thank the 7 laymen and women of the File Review Committee for their work on this report. They have spent hundreds of hours reading thousands of pages, seeking to make the necessary and just decisions that went into compiling this list. I cannot begin to say thank you to them enough. That having been said, this is still a work in progress. The committee worked with the files information that they had, but I am aware that there may be more information out there of which they and the diocese are not aware at this time. As things unfold, I am completely open to making the necessary changes to this list. We have hidden nothing. It does not do me or the diocese any favor whatsoever to obscure the truth about these sins of the past. And to the victim survivors of clergy sexual abuse, I apologize once again. For many of you, it will be a relief to see this list finally being published. However, for others, seeing the names in print may be a cause for a fresh wound or trauma. I am also aware that there are those who until now have been silent survivors, victims of abuse who thought they were the only one and no one would believe them. If you need help, call us. We want to help, and I am always ready to listen. I believe you. So I'll turn it over to Ellen now for any questions that you might have.
Before we begin, I just want to be clear that we cannot, in order to protect the victims, we cannot discuss details of specific alleged allegations, and we cannot discuss numbers of cases per clergy on the list. So if you have a question, I ask that you state your name, what media source you're with, then you can say your question and whether or not it's directed to a specific person or it's a general question.
Liz Murray with Burlington Free Press.
Was it 54, Mike? Good.
We started with 52, and then as the process went along, we asked for some more files and looked at different files, because there's something that we may have seen in one file that gave us a name, and I don't know if we have a final number of how many total that we ever looked at.
But you had full access to all files?
We had full access to everything that, the personnel files that are here on the premises.
So at least 52 priests.
52 different priests to start with, and
I'm Kevin O'Connor with Vermont Digger. So all of the files that this committee is seeing is what has also gone to the Attorney General and any other state and local task force that are studying this independently.
Correct. The State Attorney General's office has had access to any files that they've asked for. There was one file that they said they hadn't seen when we sent them the list on Monday. So they've had that list, this list since then, because we didn't want to have any surprises for them. And so they did say that there was one file which was not a diocesan priest, but a religious order priest, and it was a very small file that we had, and they subsequently have asked for that. But that's the only case, the only situation that I know of in which they did not have all the files that we've had, and I think that was just because they just didn't have his name.
Hi,
Come
I'm
here.
Mr. Ring from the Associated Press. What about the other 12 or 14 beyond the 40? What's the status of those cases?
Well, go ahead, Mike.
Files?
it's one of those things that I'm not sure that we can ever say we've exonerated any of them. I mean, based on the information we have at this point, the only ones that we found credible at this point are the 40 that we've identified. We do expect that when this report is out and the news accounts get out there, that in fact, probably more people, as the bishop said, if there's people that have been suffering in silence, you know, they may come forward. And we assume that a committee will look at those at some point.
Why do you only go back to 1950? I mean, if most of the clergy are dead. I mean, I asked that question, I'm curious how institutional you think this is or was, or has been. You know, does this go back 100 years, forever, or?
I'll answer the first part of that. We had to start somewhere, and most of the other dioceses that we had studied started in 1950, and that seemed like a good year to start. But as far
I
as
think
the
also, one of the reasons why 1950 is the number is because part of the reasons why we did this was because we want to reach out to victims who are alive now. And when you start going way back in history, you're dealing with cases that there's no living victim survivors of these clergy perpetrators. So, I mean, we had to set a number somewhere. The work of the committee, when I asked them back in November to get on a committee, I think if they had known how much time and effort they were going to put in, they would have said, thank you, but no thank you, Bishop. But I mean, I really do thank them for all of their work. You know, sometimes some of the cases they looked at, and sometimes the case would just have something like a complaint was raised about a particular priest, and the letter's in there, and it's very vague and it's very unclear, and that's all they had. So that would be like something that would be in one of those other files that just weren't, that didn't raise the level of being substantiated. I think I saw.
I'm Jack Thurston from NECN. Bishop Coyne, I wonder if you could just sort of reflect on scars made or done to the church. Obviously, the individual pain is astronomical that survivors have endured, but to the church, you know, we've seen or heard accounts of people having left the church, people having felt like their trust was irrevocably, you know, broken by sins of the church. And I wonder, now that we're at this point, you know, do you think that some of those wounds can be healed? Do you think that trust can be regained, or is it just have you lost those people?
Okay. Let me answer, and then maybe John could speak to that too, as someone who was wounded by the church, as also being a member of our committee. John's a survivor. There are people who have left the church because of this who will never come back. Whenever anybody, oftentimes when people leave a church or an organization for a reason, they're not, you can't get them back. And the violation of trust at the deepest level, when you are talking about children being abused, that's like as deep a hurt as you can do, as deep a hurt or wound of trust as you can make. So the only thing that I can do as someone who is not a perpetrator is to say, I can't fix what happened to you, but I can do everything that I can to make sure this never happens again, and I can try and help you as a victim survivor to get the healing that you need or the justice that you desire in all of this. But I think the wound of this is generational. I think it's going to haunt us for decades still to come, and all we can continue to do as a church is do the right thing for the right reasons, one person at a time. It's basically brick by brick. But I would say, I think, for the past 18, 20 years now, the church has been one of the safest organizations for families and children to be because of the strict acts that we put into place because we were so bad at not making sure this didn't happen. No?
I think I first presented myself to the diocese as a victim in, I'm going to guesstimate, the late 90s. I sought counseling assistance, both individual and group counseling, and that was supported by the diocese. At some point, with some other victims, as an expression of my disappointment in the institution, I sought a settlement with the diocese. But even after that settlement, I continued to kind of knock on the door and ask that the names of perpetrators be published, and I was especially interested in the name of my abuser, that his name be made public. I think Jack's original question was related to where do we go from here? And I think the bishop's statement that's now on the website indicates that ideally this would have happened 15 years ago, and I couldn't agree more. But this is where we are today, and one can only hope that this offers some opportunity for healing of individuals, but healing within the church as well. So.
I'll go over there.
Lisa.
Liz Starbuck on
Liz.
Channel 5. This question's for John. What's today like for you, having your perpetrator's name out in the public now?
I got a 3-word email from someone that I grew up with last night. It was just someone I knew. And the email said, "Thank you, John." And so that was important for me to get that affirmation that what we're doing here is important for a number of people. I can't emphasize enough how important it is if someone feels distressed by what's happening, that they reach out to a loved one, reach out to their primary care provider, reach out to their counselor, to talk to somebody. So it has been stressful, but for me today, I feel an awful lot of support from close family and friends, and certainly from the bishop as well. So.
Spencer Conlon, Local 22 for Bishop Coyne. In commissioning this report, I think the top priority has been transparency all along. It is my understanding yesterday a few media outlets were invited to some sort of information session. Does that kind of contradict your push for transparency?
No, because they didn't get anything more than what you've got here today. They didn't get the list. They didn't get my statement. It was basically just kind of like a deep background to leading up to the report. And I'd be willing to follow up with any media outlets that would like to go a little bit deeper after this press conference as well. There was no effort to be non-transparent. I just thought, I reached out to a couple of outlets because they had been some of the most persistent in terms of following the story, and I just felt that, wanted to get out some background on it before this statement. So if outlets feel slighted by that, that was my decision and mine alone, and we can correct that behavior for the future. The best way to do is to speak with the Director of Communications, though, follow up on that. John would like to make a comment, too.
From my perspective, I want to thank Ellen and her staff for that opportunity yesterday, because I don't do this every day. And so to be able to be in a quiet room with not a lot of people was a much easier starting point for me. So that opportunity yesterday for me as a victim was very important.
Sasha Goldstein at 7 Days. By my count, there were about 13 priests that are still living. Did you make an attempt to contact any or all of them? And if so, were you successful?
I made an attempt to contact the ones that we have on our list that are still living. With one exception, I think. John, was it just the one? Yeah. With one exception, I didn't get a chance to speak to the priest, but I left a voicemail a couple of times. His phone was going to voicemail. So yes, they were informed, and yes, I got the full spectrum of emotions and feelings, and they really aren't. My number wasn't 13. I think some of the other ones that may have been religious order priests that aren't my diocese, that weren't diocesan, so I didn't contact them. But and we did try and reach out to families of these priests that we know of to let them know that their uncle's name or their brother's name was going to be on the list.
How many was it then that you contacted or attempted to?
Well, it wasn't just through me, but I've sat down directly with one family, came in to see me ahead of time because they had heard, because we had told them that their uncle's name was going to be on the list. Mm-hmm. And they were very upset because he's deceased, and they felt that he didn't have an opportunity for justice for his name. And the other ones, there were names of priests that were already, they knew, because if their uncle,
the living ones?
Yeah, or the family knew that the priest had been removed from ministry for cause already. So it wasn't it wasn't a new allegation. So we just tried to let families know. Liz?
Oh, Liz.
Yeah, Bishop, where do you go from here? So there are more victims that come forward. Will you form a new committee to investigate?
No, the members of the present committee have offered to continue in the role, not all of them, but some of them have. And so they know the drill, they know how to read the files, they know what was in them. So I'm hoping I can continue to rely upon them. I certainly want to keep it at least one level removed from clergy and from staff so that people can see it's independent, that it's not being controlled by me. I printed their report exactly as they gave it to me without any editing. We did have some conversations about things, and I did say to them when I got the final report, I'm not quite sure about this one. Can you explain to me why? And they said they made a very strong case, and I said, okay. So, but other than that, the report is their report, and which they gave to me, which is now my report.
I think there was a question.
Don Amato from Channel 3. You mentioned speaking to families, and some families were upset. Is there concerns that we could be, smearing some of these names who weren't completely substantiated by a court of law, where these people don't have that chance to defend themselves?
Yes, there is that possibility. But the committee, if you read their report, and I don't know if Mark wants to speak to it or somebody else wants to speak to it, they can tell you the criteria that they use to try and prevent just that travesty of justice from happening.
Sure. So one of the first things we had to determine, what does it mean to be credibly accused, right? And so we looked at a number of different dioceses who had done this before us, and you could pick a very low bar and say, I accuse you of this, you're on the report. Or you could go proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very, very high bar. We looked at the Diocese of Syracuse. You'll see the criteria we came up with. We like that. Credible is defined as an allegation based on the facts of the case, natural, plausible, and probable, corroborated with other evidence from another source, acknowledged or admitted to by the accuser. So that was our standard. So we
At least
agree.
one of those, right?
What's that?
At least
Yeah,
one.
if
At least
you
one.
have one of those three, that we define that as a credible accusation. But that was the first task. What does it mean to be credibly accused? And that's what we came up with.
And that was even before we even
They've
looked at
actually got
any
another follow-up
files.
with you, Mark.
I'm sorry.
There's another follow-up right here, I think.
Follow-up, sure.
I just wondered, did any of the priests admit to this, that you?
There were definitely priests who admitted that they did this. In fact, looking at all the files, in a way, those were the easiest, right? If someone's admitted they did this, or they're even in prison, they're credibly accused.
Or did any living priests do so, or?
I don't
There's a couple of the living ones that,
who admitted that they, yes, yeah, there were a few.
How many, you say, are in prison? How many are in prison?
none right now.
There are none in prison right now, as far as I know. I'm looking at Mike. Do you remember?
Is
No.
not in prison, and,
Did
and,
any go to
and,
prison?
yeah,
There were definitely several who went to prison and have since passed away.
trying to think.
One,
Police, three.
2007 case. But anyways, let's get back on track for moderating.
Hold on. So I'll go over here.
Were any of the names of the priests that came out through this report, were any of them new allegations that hadn't been reported publicly in the past, like through the lawsuits and the
Yes, the problem with when names were disclosed and how they disclosed is the vagueness of, is the reality that this list was never published. So what you have is names that were disclosed back in 92, 93 when the original settlements were made with the orphanage. Names that were disclosed after 2002 when with the legal cases involving lawsuits and the files that were required to be turned over to the state attorney generals as well as to the lawyers for the victim survivors. So a lot of these names were out there, but they were out there they were out there in a kind of general, specific way. You know, they were in the kind of like in the conversation, in the stories that were being told. But at no point was there like a list that was actually published of these names. Mike, is that fair to say that? Okay, he was in the business. So most of the names that are on this list are ones that have been out in the public, and they're ones that people are going to say, okay, we knew that. But there are a number of other names, which I can't give you a specific number again because of the nebulous nature of all of this. But there are new names. In particular, one of the family that came to see me, that's a new name. And they're very upset that their uncle, brother's name was coming forward. So there are new names, but the names are new, not in the sense that they're new and the priest had to be removed from ministry. They're new in the sense that this is the first time they've been disclosed in a list.
Bishop Quinn, I understand you can't speak about specifics, but regarding the priests who are still alive, in just general terms, is there anything that any call that this list makes to public safety? Have you reached out to, the police chief in a local town, say, hey, this former priest is living in your community,
Sure.
you should be aware, anything like that?
Okay. Two things, or at least two things. Any allegation that we've received of abuse of a minor is turned over to law enforcement and has been turned over to law enforcement. So law enforcement has these names. Even if they're deceased, they've been turned over. But the fact is that none of these men have been convicted of anything. They were never brought to criminal law. They were never brought to a court. They've never been convicted. So they're not on a list of offenders. So, and they have not had their place in law. So if I go to the police and say, hey, this guy, if we know where this guy is, because once they leave the priesthood, they're on their own, they can move somewhere else. I have no jurisdiction over them. If we go to the police and say, hey, this guy's living in your area, they really can't do much other than be aware of it perhaps, but they haven't been convicted, they're not on the list of offenders. What do you do? It's hard to, the point that you raise is a valid one, but I'm limited with what I can do because of the fact that these cases are way beyond the statute of limitations for criminal cases.
Well, then how should the public receive this information? Obviously for individual survivors, this, as you say, will be a relief, but for other people out this is just received by the general public? If not,
I
some sort
would
of
hope
safety
that,
standpoint?
that if they're aware of of someone on this list living in their neighborhood, that they be vigilant and aware of it. And most of these guys are very aged too. And, you know, that doesn't mean there's not potentiality there. I mean, St. Augustine said, sin doesn't end until you're in the grave. But, you know, I think in most of these cases, they can I think they can have a pretty good sense that these abusers are not capable of abusing again, but knowing the names out there, perhaps they'll be more vigilant.
Colin Flanders with the Essex Reporter. Do you anticipate any civil litigation to come out of this, and how would you approach victims who might be seeking financial compensation?
Up until this point, I've settled anytime a victim has come forward to me directly through our office looking for some kind of a settlement, we've settled with them. Anytime they've been gone through a lawyer, we've settled with them up until this point. We have 6 cases right now that were put forward even before this list. We received notice at the end of June, beginning of July, and our lawyers are working with them. So there are litigation involving 6 new claims against us. Statute of limitations has been removed. We don't have any money. There's no more insurance. We have very limited unrestricted funds. I hope we can settle, but I don't know if I don't know what we're going to do. So the potential for more cases coming forward is there. We made the decision to publish this list before anybody knew the statute of limitations was going to be removed in the state of Vermont in perpetuity, which just blows my mind in terms of justice. But we'll do the best but I want to give justice to if someone was abused, I want to give them the justice that they're due, and I've tried to do that since I've gotten here. So up to this point, we've settled with every single one of them. We haven't gone to court. We've given them just remuneration for what happened to them.
So what do you say to people who might think that just having the names out there isn't enough? Who want it?
You know, I hope that they would come and talk to us and see if we can work this out through some kind of a compensation through my office rather than go through lawyers. That gets expensive on both sides. But I'm also hoping that maybe there's not a lot of victims out there who haven't already come forward, and that perhaps, and I'm hoping that we're not going to face the struggle of having to settle these cases. But I don't know. I just trust in God. I just have to trust.